Hey y'all, how's everybody doing? I'm Jemima. Let's talk about web components. So I'm a self-taught front-end developer and school-taught systems engineer, originally from Lagos, Nigeria, but I currently live and work in London for a company called We Make Websites. As you can guess from my company, we make websites, and that's what I do. I'm a front-end developer. And when I first got into web design, I used to build websites with HTML and CSS. It was simpler times back then, and I thought it was really cool that you could just write text and have like these cool designs appear on your screen. And then a year later, I got into React, and I was like, what the heck is this? Because that's not what I signed up for. I was getting node modules, and I was getting installs, and I was getting NPM, and I did not understand any of that. I understand it now, but back then I thought it was very complicated. So when I first started building websites, I really liked the simplicity of HTML. I liked how it allowed you just write text without needing a build or without needing any special tools. And you could do it just with the browser you had. Everything was involved and you didn't have to install anything. But what I don't like about HTML is how repetitive it is. So I build my portfolio website using HTML. And if I want to post a blog post or like update a talk, I have to copy and paste everything because HTML, they don't understand the concepts of reusability. And then I found out about web components. So web components allow you to take the simplicity of HTML and combine it with the reusability of like React components. So web components themselves are a suite of technologies that allow you to create reusable HTML elements. And I think they're pretty cool, which is why I'm giving this talk to convince you guys that they are cool too. So we'll see how that goes at the end of it. So what are web components and how do they work? So like we've said, web components are a suite of technologies. So what that means is that they combine multiple different things. I forgot the technical word for it, but things to create a bigger thing. So first you have custom elements. Custom elements are a JavaScript API that allows you to define a new custom element. So think of it as with React, you create a button component. If you want to call your button component on the page, you just call button component. So custom elements allow you to use that same naming convention, but with native HTML. So they're pretty cool. And then we have I'll turn on my laser pointer. Yes, excellent. And then we have the shadow DOM. The shadow DOM is what allows you to create web components in a way that they are removed from the rest of the page. So we're creating a component, but it's not affecting any of the other components on the page. This is really important, and we'll see why when we get to the shadow points slide. And finally, we have HTML templates. HTML templates are what allow you to actually render the HTML content without needing to specify any .inner HTML like you have in JavaScript. So this talk is going to be mostly coding, but also me telling you what I'm doing while I'm coding. It's fun, we'll see. So this is an example of something I would build using regular HTML. It's like a very simple post container. If I was building this with HTML, it would be a lot of copy and paste. So I'm going to open up CodePen so we can see what that looks like. Give me a sec. I forget how to leave full screen in Max. There we are. Alrighty. I already had everything set up here. Because last time I tried to live code, it didn't go well, so I was like, I'm not going to do that again. It's not worth the nervous breakdown I almost had, so we're just going to see what I've already built. Yes. And I will zoom in because it's really hard to see these things. So yeah, this is pretty much an example of what a native HTML div would look like. So it's a lot of copying and pasting and writing the same code over and over again. So we're trying to see how do we take this copy and paste and make it reusable. So first of all, let's get to what a custom element would look like if we were doing it with this. Navigating back to this part. Custom elements. All right, I will write a little code though, just so it's kind of clear what's going on. So basically, custom elements, every time you create a new component, you work with it as a class. So your components are created like classes, but you're using JavaScript. So it's kind of like if you were working with React, the same way you'd have a class React component. This way, we're just putting it directly into JavaScript. So I have some notes written up on that, and then we can move on. Custom elements. So if we were going to create our custom element, we would have to define our class custom components, and our class custom component would extend the HTML elements, kind of the same way that React extends the React components. And I'm sorry if I'm using React a lot, that's the only other framework I work with. So if you don't work with React, how well? And then when you define your new component, you define it using your custom elements API. This is also an inbuilt method, so it works with every browser, and you don't need to install anything from it. It just works right out of the bat. And then when you're calling the components, when I'm calling it in HTML, I can just refer to my component using the tags that I created. The only naming convention you have is that you have to use a hyphen, so it doesn't work with camel case or sentence case or any of that. You have to use a hyphen with the component to define it. So yeah, custom components, they are what allow you to define custom HTML tags. They render the custom HTML tag in the DOM, and they use lifecycle methods. The same way we can have React component did mount, in custom components we will have connected callback. So yeah, let's see a little code now on how I would write a custom component using the same post that I had before. Okay, great. I will blot out all of this, not that. So if I wanted to create a new class component, I'm just going to have a class post component. I'm going to zoom in some more. Excellent. No. Yes. A class post component, and then I would have that extend the HTML element I want to put it in. And then because it's a class, I would need to call my constructor. And then just passing the super blah, blah, blah. And yeah, so this is pretty, and then when I wanted to define the custom elements, I would come down here and I would have custom elements dot define, and then I'm passing in my post component, and then the actual post component class we just created. I'm going to copy all the logic because I've already done it here before, but basically what I'm doing there is defining what I want the post component to do. So here we just have setting the this.inner HTML as whatever I want the post component to be set into. So this is how it would look if I was setting it in a simple way. So let's have all of this. Delete all of that. Yep, so now we've defined our custom components as post component and we've passed in the data. But let's say we didn't want, because obviously with this way we see that all the data is still static. So now I want to pass in actual data that my components can use. So we can do that with two ways. We can pass them in as content or we can pass them in as attributes. So because I'm working with custom elements now, I'm going to pass it in as an attribute. So let's say I wanted to set, in my HTML, I wanted to have title equals to hello world. Now with this, you can see that here we're setting the this.inner HTML. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out, and then I'm going to have this const title equals this dot get attributes, and then I'm just going to get the title attributes, right? And then this dot inner HTML equals to, and we're going to set h1 as title, close h1. There we go. So that is how it would work if I wanted to pass in an attribute as text. So we can do the same thing to set, title or yeah, there you go. So we can do the same thing to set content, functions, anything basically. So this is how it would work with custom elements. So as you can see, we've created our custom element here, and we've passed in all the properties that we want as our titles and everything. But one thing we'll notice is that we're still calling the styling for this thing, we're still styling it globally. What this means is if we import our custom elements anywhere on the page, they can be affected by the rest of the styling on the page. We don't want that because web components themselves are meant to be something that you can import anywhere and they will have the exact same styling and exact same functionality. So that brings us something we call the shadow DOM, which sounds very cool because it is. Yeah. So with the shadow DOM, you're basically taking the regular DOM and you're making a shadow clone of it. So if anyone here watches Naruto, it's pretty much what you have in Naruto when you have Shadow Jutsu. It's creating an extended version of the shadow DOM. So anything that happens to the shadow DOM doesn't affect, I'm going to use the Naruto analogy. So when Naruto creates shadow clones, right? If you're fighting the shadow clone, it doesn't affect Naruto himself. So if you hurt a shadow clone, Naruto himself doesn't get hurt. That is how shadow DOM works. If you make any style changes within the shadow DOM, it doesn't affect the actual DOM. And in the same vein, any changes that are made to the actual DOM shouldn't affect the shadow DOM. So it's basically a really cool way of creating an encapsulated form of an element. And it's cool because I get to reference anime, so everyone knows I'm a nerd. That's great. All right. So when you're creating the shadow DOM, you take the same functionality that you had in your original custom element, that was the class component that we just had, and then you create a shadow root. The shadow root is created using this specific method here, and then we can just append the child to it. So the shadow root is basically a new form of the document model, but it's just called the shadow root. So you can have all the same functionality you had with document model, like shadow root or append child. And yeah, one thing I like to reference with the shadow DOM is that we use the shadow DOM a lot more than we think. So every time you think of embedding an iframe, or when you call a HTML video tag, or when you call an HTML image tag, all these things are rendered in the shadow DOM. That just means they are creating new elements that you can't see and you can't change. So we're going to do a little view of what that would look like. So let's just go to YouTube real quick. YouTube.com. All right. Leave me alone, cookies. Reject all. Yes. I just always reject cookies out of spite. It's not like, it's nothing personal. I'm just like, no. Okay, so let's say we have this video here. Now I have to click it. Let's see. Okay, acoustic covers. That sounds good and PG friendly. So we have this video here, and you can see that here it's just a video tag. I'm going to zoom in. Here, this is just a simple video tag, and there's nothing in it, right? That's how HTML elements work. They are rendered on the page. But then you have something in your settings that would actually show you that there is more in there than it looks. If you go to your settings and you go under elements, you see we have something called show user agent shadow DOM. And then if I click this and I go back to the video, you can see that now we can actually enter the video tag. And in that video tag, we can see the shadow roots, and then we can see all the styling and all the actual elements that are inside the video tag. So that is how the shadow DOM works. It's allowing you create new elements that can be exported and used within any page, but they don't have any actual effect on the main page. So that's the main reason you can import a video tag and it doesn't get affected by any styling on the page. For example, if you import this video tag, it has this scroll bar here. The scroll bar is always going to be the fixed styling of the main video elements. It's not going to be affected by any other scroll bar you have on your page, which is kind of how you want your custom element to work. You want it to always be predictable and always be the same. So yeah, that's something cool about Shadow DOM. And we can go back and see the rest of this. So yeah, basically it works like an iframe. It allows you embed elements in the page and it doesn't affect anything else that's happening within the global page. It sets style and markup without affecting the global DOM, and it allows you to interact with the shadow root. So let's take a look at how we would create a shadow thingy. What's the word? Yeah, how would we interact with the shadow DOM using our custom components? We have this one here. All right, so previously we created the post component and we saw how you can pass in attributes to the post component. That's setting the title and setting the Oh, this is not React Advanced London. This is NDC London. There we go. Pardon me, this is like the third time I'm giving this talk, so sometimes the names get mixed up. All right. Hello, NDC London. So we had the thing that we created previously where we were setting the post components, and this is basically just all the things we did before. We get the attributes and we pass it into the inner HTML, and then we define the post components. So now what we want to do is we want to take this and we want to make it a shadow component instead of a regular custom elements component. So let's take a look at how we'll do that. It's right here. I'm actually just going to copy all of this. And yeah, that's fun. Okay. And then I think here we can just call our shadow component. Yep. So basically what we did here was that we just ran this .attach shadow to create our new shadow component. And one cool thing about the shadow component, which I was supposed to show, but I forgot, is that it lets you, so we're going to take a look at how shadow components are not affected by main components. So here we have the shadow components, and we're going to create the post components. So as we've seen previously with the post component, we could pass global styling into it. But with the shadow component, what we're actually going to do is not pass global styling into it. We are going to see if it gets affected by any of the global styling. So here we have, just a sec. We have the shadow component and it has the same post class. So now let's see if we can change the background color of the shadow component without going into it. So I'm going to target the .post, which is the class that's here. And let's take all of this out. And now if we pass in .post and let's say background color red, nothing happens. What if we make it very important that the background color of .post is red? Same thing, nothing happens. But now if we go into our JavaScript where we are defining the shadow components and passing in the style here, let's change the background color here to red. And that's pretty much how the shadow components will work. It's not affected by the global styling, it's only affected by the styling that's within the exact component itself. So now we've seen custom elements and we've seen the shadow DOM. We're going to move on to the third part. I already showed you this, which is HTML templates. So now one thing we may have noticed when we're working with the custom elements and with the shadow DOM is that we still have to be defining all our HTML inside our JavaScript class. So we have to be passing in a lot of this.inner HTML. That's not very reusable. If we're thinking in the context of building a web component that we can use across multiple things, we don't want our users to always be having to write this.inner HTML. That's where HTML templates come into play. HTML templates are what allow you to write your actual HTML markup without needing to pass it into JavaScript. So we're going to do a little demo on how the HTML template would work. That's all of this. But yeah, basically what HTML templates do is that they store reusable HTML content. That is content you're planning to extract and use somewhere else. And then they include encapsulated style within that template, meaning that your styling is still relegated to that template alone. And finally, you can use them to include custom text. This is the most important part of HTML templates. As we were saying previously, we were setting our content by getting attributes. So we don't want to get attributes. We want the user to be able to put in any content that they work. And HTML templates work this way by using something we call slots. So now we're going to do a full demo using the three principles we've just spoken about here. I'm going to run a little Open Visual Studio Code. Yep. All right, so I had this previously for the post components, but basically what we have here in our web components.html, what we do is that we create a new template. So I'm going to actually write this one out because you guys deserve actual code at this point. So let's have an index.html. So first, I'm going to define all our usual HTML markup. So that's going to be HTML. I'm going to call this web components. And then I'm going to create a template. So a template would never show on the main page. The template tag itself never gets rendered. The only thing we use the template tag for is to store content. So let's just test that out real quick. I will create my template tag. And let's have hello, NDC London, and save this. And now if we go to where we have this stored, yep, the page is empty. And the reason it's empty is because the template tags themselves never get rendered. If we inspect the body, you can see that the content we created is actually within the template. It just doesn't show up on the page. Template tags were not made to show up on the page. They were made to just store information. So let's have all our styling and everything encapsulated within this template tag, which I've already written here. So this is the styling, and this is the content that we want. So we're going to take this and we're going to put it in here. So basically we're just styling the components, styling the post component that we want to create, styling the title, and then we have this part, which is the important part. We've created our class. This is our class container. And then we have this slot. So how slots work are, slots are what you use to actually pass in information to your templates. So now when we're creating a new component, we don't have to specify this.get attribute or this.anything. We just pass in the information that we want to show up to where this slot is. So first, so now if we want to create this, we have to go create a new JavaScript file. So I'm going to have an index.js. And I'm going to have a class post component. How do you spell component? Component. Yes, that's correct. Extends HTML elements. We have our constructor. We have our super. And then so what we want to do first is that we're going to use JavaScript to get everything that's inside this template. So what we have to do is we give this template an ID of post. And that thing to notice about the template is that you can't actually interact with anything within a template. So let's say I go back to this Chrome. So you can see that within the template, I have my document fragments. Let me reload that. Yep, so within the templates, I have, let's say, class post. Now, if I wanted to interact with this using JavaScript normally, I would do document.get, let's say const post equals document.get elements by class name. So the class name I'm looking for is post, but it returns undefined because the post class is within the template itself. And as far as JavaScript and the DOM is concerned, it has no business with what is going on inside the template. So that's why we cannot access anything within this template using JavaScript. So how do we actually get this content that we need? That's where cloning comes in. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to target our template itself using document.getElementById post. The reason we can target the template itself is because the template is not content in a template. It's just the template. I said template 3 times, but I feel like that makes sense. So if I do go back to the page and I search for, let's say, const template equals document.getElementById, let's pass in post. Nope. Oh no, let's refresh. All right. Yeah, there you go. Const template equals, let's say let template equals document.getElementsById. Well, I do not know why that's not working. Oh no, it is working. It was just returning undefined because console. So yeah, we can access the template itself within here. So that's the same thing we're doing here. We're going to access our template as const template equals to element.post. But now we've noticed that we can't actually get any access to what's within the templates. If we go back here and we try to do template.inner HTML, it just returns it as like the specific string. But this is not what we want, because what we want is that we want to be able to attach it to the DOM in a way that we can use it. So what we do instead is that we get our template content. So when you're getting your template content, you have const template content equals to template.content. And then we want to clone the new content. No, not editable. Template.content, god damn it. No, there we go. Dot clone node and true. All right, so what we've done here is that we have just cloned everything that we had in the template content previously. And then finally, we want to attach all of this to our shadow DOM. So I think at this point, we can just copy and paste. All right. And that's pretty much it. So we got the template content, and now we've attached it to the shadow roots. And then we've defined our new post components as post components. And then if we go back to our index.html, let's import that script we just created. .index/js. I think that should be fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yep. And then finally, we call the post component outside of the template class. And now if we go back here and refresh, we have the post component that we just created using the HTML templates. And if we go within the post component, we can see that we have everything that we've put inside the post component. We have the style that we defined in the template, and we have the div post and the class and the content. So what we notice here is that it still has the default title and the default content. So let's say we actually wanted to change the default title and the default content. We could just go into our post components and let's have a span, and we say slot equals to title, and this is hello NDC London. And we go back here, and that's pretty much how that works. So now we've created a component that is reusable and it's encapsulated from the rest of the page. So basically any changes that we make outside of this component, it's not actually going to affect what is inside this component. So let's take a look at that. Let's create a global style, and the component itself has a class name of post. So we're not going to work within the template, we're going to go outside the template now. Let's pass in style.post, background color red, important. And if we reload the page, nothing happens because it doesn't matter that we changed a .post outside of the components. It's not going to affect the actual template itself. So let's see what happens if we create another actual post component. So let's just take this. We're going to have div class post. Yep, and this is going to be template component. And if we go back to the Chrome and reload. So yeah, this is the post that is added to the regular DOM. And you can see that it gets all the stylings that a regular DOM would have. And this is the post that we have within our template components. And you can see that it's not affected at all by the rest of the global DOM styling. So that's pretty much how web components work. There was a fourth method involved in web components that was depreciated for reasons, and that method was called HTML imports. So what you may notice in the code that we wrote here is that we're still defining our templates within the actual index.html. With HTML imports, they allowed you import HTML files, so you didn't need to do this, the same way we imported the JavaScript file. And it was really cool, but then they were like, we're going to take this method away because why not? So we don't have that anymore. But while we did have it, it was very useful and it would have been super cool. So yeah, that's pretty much how web components work. They allow you to create reusable, encapsulated elements that are not affected by any other changes that you may make on the page. What's really cool about web components? Well, everything, but let's take a look at some of the fixed benefits that we have with web components. I can close this. Go back here. Why web components are awesome. So like we've seen, they allow you to create elements that you can use anywhere on a page. And those elements, anytime you use them, they will always look the exact way you expect them to look. No installation required. I didn't have to set anything up or run any build processes or install any NPM packages. All these web components are included directly in the browser, and you never have to actually set anything up. You just have to start writing, and it works straight out of the box. And it's cross-framework compatible. This is probably the coolest thing about web components. If I create a web component, I can use it in a React project, in a Vue project, in an Angular project, and it will work the exact same way across all three projects. Why? Because it is, at the very base of it, it's a HTML element. So it's the same way if you write a HTML tag in React, it's the same way you write a HTML tag in Vue. That's how web components work. You can export these fully functional and completely encapsulated components and use them across all your projects. So they are really cool. Why web components are not so cool? They are not SEO friendly. Because of the way web components are defined, they don't register to the actual, they don't register to search engines as actual HTML, because technically, it's not actual HTML. We're collecting the HTML with JavaScript and then attaching that to a shadow root. Search engines don't have access to a shadow root. So if you put any information that you want search engines to pick up within a web component, it's not likely to pick up all the information that you need. So that is a downside. And also, it is still JavaScript dependent. One thing I like to focus on when building websites is how fast can my website load? Whenever you're adding content with JavaScript, you're always going to have a tiny bit of a lag before all your scripts download. If you have slow internet and you have a really high build package, it's even slower for the content to load. So that's still a problem with web components. If you're using JavaScript to render them, there's always going to be that slight time that it takes for your JavaScript to actually download and for the web component to actually be rendered on the page. But other than that, I say they're pretty cool. So frameworks versus web components. So now we've seen how web components work. We've seen that they work pretty much in the same way we'd expect a framework to work, which is that we can create a component and then use it anywhere else. So is it a question of why do we use frameworks instead of web components? Not really. So as we can see on the React website, it says that React and web components are built to solve different problems. If I was going to build a fully functional multi-page application that had lots of users, like users were submitting forms and it was collecting data and displaying data, I wouldn't do that using web components because I don't like to suffer, and that just sounds like a lot of work. But at the same time, if I was going to build a simple component that I wanted to use across multiple projects, for example, I'm a design agency and I have a project that I'm building with React, and I have another project I'm building with Nuxt.js, and then I have like a simple component like a fixed, let's say a tab application. Like I have a tab application that I want to use across both projects. My best bet would be using web components because I know for certain that it's going to integrate properly with both frameworks I'm working with. So yeah, both is good. And also regarding with web components, you can use this website to see which projects your web components can be used with because they are not fully compatible with every framework. You can use them in every framework, but they just have slight glitches somewhere. So we can go to this website. Yeah. So if we are working with Vue, it's like 91%. With React, it's like 71%, but with the new React, it's 100%. And so on and so forth. You can see more of these things. We also have libraries online where people publish web components they've already built. So it's like you get to use somebody else's code, and you still have all the same functionality and everything that came with it. So yeah, that's pretty much that about web components. Let me see if I have anything else on my slides, because sometimes I surprise myself. I do not. Great. So if you do want access to the slides, I have them on my website. It's jemimaabu.com/talks/webcomponents. And if you are interested in reading up more about web components, I came across this really cool article by Anamonius on LogRockets that basically explains why web components are not as widely used. I was hoping somebody would ask me a question about that, but I will answer it myself, even though I'm the one that asked the question. So it kind of just explains, like, if web components are so cool and they're so useful, why don't we use them as much? But yeah, before I explain that, does anyone have any questions? Great, we have one question over there. Okay, it's really running. Let's just
So with certain frameworks like Angular, for example, if you did want to style a component, you can kind of break through and use like NGD to actually style the component itself. Let's say you want to do that for the web component. So let's say you did want to change the font or something. Can you actually do that, like pierce through? You
can't, is the simplest way to put it, because everything you're creating within the web component is stored within the web component. So ideally, you shouldn't be breaking through at all. That is another downside about web components. If you want to apply global styling to a web component, you have to copy the global styling and paste it within the web component itself. So things like fonts, brand colors, font sizes, everything, you need to define it within the web component itself because it does not inherit from the page. Thank you very much.
That's still true if you ship a bunch of web components. You have to copy paste. Sorry for the video. Sorry. If you have a bunch of web components that you're distributing, then do you have to copy paste your styles into all of them?
Yep. They're still cool, guys. I assure you, web components are still, it's just that one thing that's really annoying. It's kind of like, it's a pro and a con, because on the one hand, you know that you're only always going to get the same styling, but on the other hand, if you did want the same styling, you have to paste it yourself, so.
I had another question, because you showed the templating, but the template itself was on the page where you were using the component.
Yeah.
So how does that work with the self-containedness of it?
So the template itself is on the page where you're using the web component?
Yeah, but I would expect the template to be part of the web component itself, right? But
so
how does that work?
Basically is like, it's a holder. It's just like think of it as a cardboard box that just holds stuff. So what you care about is the stuff within the box itself. So it's not, the template itself doesn't get rendered on the page and it doesn't affect the page. The only thing we use the template to do is have a marker that's why we give the template an ID of posts, because that's the marker we're using to actually collect the content that we need. We just use the template so we don't need to do like the inner HTML in JavaScript, and so we can be able to render content within the page.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Great. Any other questions? All right, I'll ask that question I was going to ask earlier.
No,
so.
Last one.
Oh, shit. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, no, actually, I wasn't entirely clear there. With the templates,
yeah.
If you're going to have your component and you want to put it on 10 web applications that you have, do you not then have to copy the template to 10 different applications?
What you're asking is, do you have to import the templates everywhere else for the thing?
You would need it on every application, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You would?
Yeah, sorry, was that your question? Ah. Okay, cool. So the template itself is part of the web component. When you install it, what you're getting is the templates and the JavaScript file that makes the templates functional. So when you call that in your page, that's where you actually have the, what do you call it? That's where you actually render the thing, where it's like post-components. But when you if you download the web components online, you're going to download the template.html, and you're going to download like template.js or whatever.
Right. And then how do I put that on the page?
So you put the template HTML in your HTML, and then you have your JavaScripts wherever you want to keep your JavaScript. Well, you import the JavaScript in the page as well. You have to import both the HTML and the JavaScript. I feel like I'm making web components sound bad. They're not. The whole point of this talk is to show how they're cool, because they are cool. All right, any other questions? All right, I'll ask my own question now. So, Jemima, if the web components are so cool, why aren't they more popular? Excellent question, Jemima. I will answer that. Basically, web components were introduced in 2011, and then they were kind of standardized in 2013. At that point, we already had Angular and React was just coming out, so we already had all the cool new frameworks. Web components were meant to be this thing that was like, oh, hey, guys, we don't actually need to use 5 different frameworks. We can just use one framework. But basically, they kind of missed their mark with it, because web components themselves can only do so little. Like I said, I would not use a web component to build like a fully functional multi-page application because it gets really burdensome just to install the things. So the reason web components are not more widely adopted, I would say, is because they kind of just missed the mark. Like you already had React, and web components were just promising to do what React already did. So I feel like if they had come out before React or before Angular, then people would have been like, oh yeah, web components are really cool. And then they could have integrated better with the frameworks that we had. But they didn't. And that's why I'm giving this talk, to convince y'all to use web components more. Okay, no other questions? That's a no. Thank you very much for attending, and I hope you learned something.